My guest today is Eugen Benedikt Russ. Eugen is a managing partner at Russ Media Equity Partners, which is an European fund holding company where they specialize in acquiring, managing, and operating profitable niche businesses in online marketplaces, consumer apps, and SaaS. Thanks a lot for coming to the Holdco Builders podcast, Eugen.
Thanks a lot for having me. Thank you.
Today, you have a portfolio of 10 plus companies, all majority ownership. Group revenue 200 million per year, 600 people, 39% IRR for majority investments over the last 6 years. Smallest portco generates about 2 to 3 million EBIT, while the largest generates almost 20 million EBIT. It all started from somewhere. First, could you please walk me through your journey from university all the way to becoming a managing partner at RMEP and its early days?
Yeah, sure. Love to. Thank you. I'll try to keep the university academic part short as it's not too relevant. I went to uni in England and then started working in Switzerland at a management consultancy, BCG. And actually, that's where the digital journey started because we were back then, this was in 2009. We did for a couple of Swiss insurances, we were building the first what they called direct insurance back then. So these were basically the first online, the entire process you could walk through online. So applying for an insurance and then actually closing an insurance contract. And back then it was mainly for the car and some simple insurances, car and household insurances. And, back then it was pretty complicated to set up this entire process because you practically had to build everything yourself. You had to build your own payment service provider. You had to build your own content management system. So things that today you can easily get out of the box. And so I did that for roughly 4 years. And then I joined Irento in Berlin, which is a niche marketplace. So they were connecting online rental companies. They were taking them online and connecting them with potential people who were renting out things. So motorhomes, event and partying equipment, construction equipment, etc. And so we were the middleman and we would connect, we would actually handle the payment for a certain time and we stopped that and I can get into why. And we were handling the availability and the pricing of those products. And that grew quite nicely. It's always been profitable. And I think at that point, I myself started realizing that there are these businesses that are platform businesses, marketplace businesses that are online and in quite small markets that they get overlooked by VC players. So VC player is always going to look for a company that could turn into the next unicorn. So for the economics of a VC fund to make sense, and to work out, they need to invest every investment that they do. And let's say a seed stage VC fund will do 30 investments. Every single one of them at point of investment needs to be able to grow into $1 billion company because they need to be able to become potential fund returners. That's just how a VC fund works. But there is another niche, and I think this rental company was a perfect example. So when I left, we were doing just over 3-4 million in revenues and $1 million in EBIT. And there are these players and they grow at 15-20% and they just grow with the market and they grow a bit above the market because more shifts. There's still a large part offline shifting to online, but it's an overlooked area because it's simply too small for traditional private equity and for VC players. And we started Russ Media Equity Partners in 2018, where we already owned 3-4 of these marketplace niche companies, and we decided to double down on the strategy. We were looking, and back then our strategy was not as focused as it was now, but we were looking for more of these players in that niche. And as we've been growing, we've been around now for almost 6 years. We realized that the niche is quite sizable and it's growing more and more. And maybe to close the circle from back when I started, the niche is getting bigger because the addressable market is getting a bit bigger because more and more companies move online. And the niche is getting bigger because you need less and less So you don't need to build your own payment service provider anymore, right? You can get that out of the box with Stripe, Adyen, however, you name it. So you can actually run and operate profitably and successfully in these niches with a team of under 20 people nowadays, sometimes even under 15 people. And you can build a company that does, 5 to 10 million in revenues at a 40, 50, 60% EBITDA margin. And so you have the addressable market has grown just because more companies are more business is done online and more shifts online every year still. And B, because it's become easier, the barriers of entry have become lower for businesses operating at small scale in this segment. And that's pretty much what we do. And I can get a bit more in detail what we're doing exactly.
Okay, so how have you been growing the portfolio? I mean, today, portfolio of 10 companies, majority ownerships. Have you been raising additional capital, or you've been just using the profits? Because it seems that it's extremely, the industry itself and the businesses you've been focusing on building, they have high profit margins. So how have you been able to grow the overall portfolio?
Yeah, we've done two things. So we haven't raised additional funds. Everything that but we haven't paid out any dividends either. So we pay out dividends from the individual portfolio companies, and the cash conversion rate on these companies is pretty much 1 minus the tax rate. So you're looking, depending on which jurisdiction you're in, anywhere between 70 to or 75 to 90% cash conversion rate. So EBITDA to cash flow. And there are no capex or anything else. So we've used all that money to do new investments. And once you have proven a track record and have stabilized these companies and brought them into 40, 50%, 60% profit margin at an annual growth rate of 10, 15, some of them maybe 17, 18%, you can approach banks, and banks will give you 3, sometimes 4x on EBITDA in funding. And you can use that to either do bolt-on acquisitions or do other acquisitions. So we've successfully refinanced some of these companies and used that money to acquire new companies.
So a little bit about your investment strategy. What do you and your team looks when acquiring a business? What are the red flags? What revenue, profit, maybe location you're looking at?
We really focus on Europe, and we do that because we all come from an operating background, and we say that if anything goes wrong in the company, we could jump in ourselves, and so our rule has been 2 to 3 flight hours from Central Europe. So that would include the UK, and that would include Israel, Turkey, some of the CIS countries. And size-wise, we started out a bit smaller. So we would probably, when we started, we would have done companies at around 500,000 to 1 million EBITDA. Now, we would still do that if there is a lot of cost cutting potential. So we always say we started either 3 million EBITDA or at least 10 million in net revenue. It pretty much doesn't matter how fast the company is growing. And we actually prefer companies that are not growing that fast because they tend to be overlooked. If they grow too fast, a lot of VCs are getting interested again. And so that is our threshold. And then, look, if we see some special situations that are completely outside of that box, we're looking at everything. And I think that's our main asset, that we've been able to build a consistent deal flow in that space. People know us. We work with a lot of, it was called the long tail of M&A advisors. So we work with a lot of, and an M&A advisor can be anything from a tax consultant, a personal lawyer to friend of the owner. And so we have a long tail of around 3,000-4,000 of these people who we're in constant touch with through email, phone calls, etc. And so I think the main asset that we have is that we have deal flow. And if you have a lot of deal flow, it allows you to choose the best deals. And that, combined with the capital constraints that we're facing, forces us to only make the best deals and forces us to keep that threshold high.
So you mentioned those companies, you can pretty much run them with a reasonably small team. So when there is a really great niche platform business, how interested the owners actually are selling their business, because it's a great lifestyle business. They can travel around, enjoy life. First of all, what are some of the reasons why they would like to sell, and how has been the deal flow over the past 2-3 years?
How we think about this is that a company gets sold on average every 30, 40 years. Let's say 30 years. That means that every single company that you approach has in that year a 3% chance of being sold. And both of us are quite young, so we can't imagine parting from our businesses just yet. But there is a stage in life, and there might be situations in life where people want to part from their business. Operating a company is hard work, and it's painful, and it's if you think about it, it's kind of have this comparison. It's basically entrepreneurship is stumbling from one failure to the other without giving up, and it's one of my favorite quotes, and it's very true. And if you've grown a company, and a lot of these companies, it's difficult to extract significant money from, and you will trade that against a one-off payment. And then the other reason is that a lot of these operators, entrepreneurs, they're first-time founders, and they have all their capital in that one company. It's a lot of risk. Now, we own by now 11 companies, and if one goes bust, which hasn't happened so far, but if one doesn't work out, it's 8% of what we do, and it's not 100% of our wallet. And so there is always a good reason for someone to sell. And sometimes they stay on board, and it's really good to have someone like us who, we come from an operating background, and we're good sparring partners, and they stay with 30, 40% stake, and they continue growing the business with us.
How much competition do you see on deals, the ones you would like to acquire? Because you mentioned you have a great reputation. So do you need to overpay, or how is it usually?
Nah, so the kind of deals that we do, they fall into a small niche where there's just not, by design, there's not a lot of competition. It's too small for private equities. It's too slow growing for VCs. The total addressable market is too small. There is just not a lot of competition to start with. And then if we like approaching deals where we have a personal relationship, or we build a personal relationship with the owner. We work on a plan together. We call that the 100-day plan. Obviously, that takes longer than 100 days to implement. But it's really situations where price is not the main factor. We will not participate. M&A advisors call a full auction. So 5-10 players that are bidding for one company. There are these companies out there, if you think of it, especially in growth private equity, in Europe, there are maybe 20, 30 players everyone has their eyes on. And if they go on a fundraise, or whenever they raise capital, they will get 15, 20 bids. It's a race to the top in a sense for the price. And we're not participating in that.
So you getting this deal flow, companies reaching out, do you sometimes get deals from other markets than Europe, for example, Australia, USA, and then you're looking at the deal, so you're like, oh, it's such a no-brainer. We would really like to do this, but we can't because it's too far from here.
Yeah, we get that a lot. So we don't get a lot of deal flow from the US. I think the US is a very efficient market, and there are a lot of domestic investors who cover that market. We get a lot from outside of Europe. We get a lot from, surprisingly, a lot from Japan. We get some deals from the Middle East. We get a couple of deals. We get deals in Turkey, Israel. Not a lot from Africa. Few from South America. I think it has to do with the fact that we're mainly reaching out to M&A advisors within Europe. And the second thing is, in terms of deal flow, you're going to generate a lot more deal flow once you have boots on the ground. So once you have a company, we have a company in Romania, and we're very successful with that company, classified space in Romania. And we're just getting disproportionately many deals from Romania. And we have always been getting a lot of deals from Romania just because we have a presence in that country. And whenever we go into a certain segment, so we started investing into dating companies 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and we're seeing a lot of deal flow in the dating space.
You're not only focusing on online marketplace, but consumer apps and SaaS as well. What sectors or industries do you find most promising when it comes to the next 5-7 years?
It's really difficult. It's like reading a glass ball in what's going to become big. But where we see a lot of potential in, and we have two investments in the space, is in the outdoor consumer app business, where, for example, we own the largest app for motorcyclists. So motorcyclists need a navigation system, but it's not about getting from one point to the next as quickly as possible, but it's about driving or riding your motorcycle on the curviest road. And so we're the clear number one in Europe. We're a strong number one in the US. So that space you're gonna see in the outdoor consumer, and that's very successful. That's growing still at over 30% year over year is very profitable. And is already this year we're gonna break the 10 million euro revenue ceiling. And I think you're going to see a lot more in that space where you're going to have consumer apps targeted at certain outdoor niches, and so that's going to be successful. We see a lot happening in niche dating. So whether that it started off with JDate and Christian Mingle, and it's just very much interest based, and we see a lot of deal flow there. And if you think dating, you think of Match, so of Tinder and Bumble. But if you look closer, you could actually realize that most of the Match.com's growth is coming from Hinge, which is their most successful app and already a significant part of the group. And if it continues growing the way it's growing now, it will overtake Tinder in 3 to 5 years. So you see more and more of these very niche dating apps. The other thing that really helps us is that COVID propelled the willingness of people to spend on virtual goods, and especially in the US, has increased tremendously. Now, people used to be stingy around $1, $2, $3 of spend, and we have in some of our apps, we have an annual revenue per user per month of $70 to $80. That is not even the highest people are. So there are other apps where people will be spending, the top spenders will be spending several $1,000s a month on purely virtual goods. So this is a very, very promising segment.
Can you discuss a recent investment you made and why you found it attractive, and how has it been, everything post acquisition?
Yeah, I think an interesting one, because it tells you a lot about how we think, has been in an online dating platform called Pure, Pure. Ukrainian founder had Russian co-investors, and he wanted to sell in 2022. And then Russia invaded Ukraine in early that year, in March that year. And obviously all of the other bidders jumped ship, because I think 80. So Roma, who was the founder, he had lived in Moscow for a long time, and a lot of the team was sitting in Russia. So we were left as the only bidder. And he really wanted to sell. He wanted to move on with his life. He didn't want to be operationally involved anymore. And so we ended up buying a company that had Russian co-shareholders next to the main shareholder, who was Roma, the Ukrainian guy, which had 85% of the team was in Russia. A significant share of the revenue came from Russia back then. Still, even though we were growing a lot in Western markets, and today India is our fastest growing market, and it was in the casual dating space with a Cypriot holding company. So I think a lot of red flags. But then after addressing each of these, we currently have the companies now in Switzerland. There are 2 people left working in Russia, or 3 out of a team of 70. We're doing 40% of our revenues in the United States. We have successfully refinanced the company with a large European bank, and we're being featured by Apple as one of the top 5 dating companies on a regular basis. And so we took a company that, as I told you at the beginning, had a lot of issues, and we transformed it into a company that nowadays we're getting inbound interest by several parties, private equity players, because there's a big company. So this is the company that's almost doing 20 million in bottom line. So we're getting significant inbound interest. And so this is what we like to do.
Can you maybe share a bit the story of Kalimoto, something we discussed before as well?
Yeah, sure. So Kalimoto, 3 founders. There were, when we looked into the company, it was quite small. They were on the lower end. They were just at the lower end of what we would start getting into. So low single-digit revenues. I think they were doing around 600,000-700,000 in EBITDA, but they were growing at over 50% year over year. So quite fast growth. None of the VCs believed in it because the total addressable market is small. So this is never going to be a $1 billion revenue company. If we continue growing, I think we're going to build a nice 40 to 60 million dollar top line at 30 million bottom line company in 10 years, but it's not going to be $1 billion company. And there were a lot of early angel investors involved, very fragmented ownership structure next to the founders, and we consolidated that ownership structure and bought a majority. And since continue growing the company, and we're still growing this year. I think we're growing at 34-35% year over year.
If you can share,
so it's been a good investment. It's been rather on the expensive side of what we have done, just because the EBITDA has been low and the growth has been high when we entered it.
What about the acquisition multiples? If you can share in these type of companies, what's maybe the average? What's the maximum? What's the minimum?
The total acquisition multiples, and that includes upfront payment, that would include earnouts, deferred payments, seller notes, would start at around 3x if the company has some obvious, there are some issues that prevent the company from raising funds elsewhere. And if they grow very quickly, then very fast, you'd be looking at 8, 9, maybe in some rare cases 10x. But we will not participate in anything that goes significantly into the double digits. That on average we would be paying between 5 and 7x.
You have a team of people, 600 people. How do you find the best talent? People who can grow those businesses, your portfolio companies, and consistently produce such a great case studies, which you just shared before, growing those businesses 30-40% a year.
I mean, we strongly believe in skin in the game and perfect alignment, and that we reach by allowing operators to buy into those companies at very attractive terms, and in exchange they commit sticking with the company for 5 years, and they're incentivized in a way that they get paid as soon as we receive our money back, but then they get paid disproportionate. So we will attract people with an entrepreneurial mindset, who have some money on the side, but not enough to buy one of those companies themselves, and that team up with us to buy a controlling majority in those companies. So we do a lot of management buyouts. We have operators who now co-own the third company already with us. So we promote entrepreneurship, and we promote people. We promote management that is willing to invest own money into the companies they run.
When it comes to expanding your portfolio, you've said that the very important thing is understanding the industry. But at the same time, you mentioned that you're maybe looking into new industries in the future. So what is your thought process or strategy or plan when it comes to you find an interesting industry and what do you do next?
We find a lot of industries that we see a lot of things that are potentially exciting, and we really try to stick with what we know. Speaking freely here, we found it very interesting what we saw in the energy space 2-3 years ago with the entire ESG movement, and you could actually buy into oil and gas companies, and especially some were more down the value chain for 2-3 times EBITDA. These were super exciting opportunities, right? And we ended up not doing any of those because it's just too far away from what we know and we understand. Our businesses are very simple. Our businesses are mainly in the B2C space. It is always about purchasing users cheaply, converting them into paying users at a conversion rate as high as possible, and then retaining those users. And it's a skill set that involves online marketing, a good understanding of product and product development, and a mastery of the data, which allows you to maximize pricing and to extract as much value as possible out of your customers. It's pretty much the same skill set we use with every company we look at, and we've developed several playbooks around that, one for pricing, one for product development, some of the other levers that we pull. But it's a very simple business if you think about it. So no deep tech, no rocket science.
Can you discuss any upcoming projects or investments that you are very excited about?
Yeah, it's sometimes difficult because the potential future partners that we're discussing with, they might listen to this podcast, right? So what I can disclose is that we always work on at least 4 to 5 hot deals at any point of time in parallel, just because it gives us optionality. And at the end, it gives us the possibility to choose the best deal. So the spaces we're looking at we're looking at a player in the online classified business. We're looking at a player in online, and it's actually an online social media marketing agency, and they have done a great job at automating the entire process. A normal marketing agency is doing 15% EBITDA margin. They're doing above 45% because they have managed to automate through make.com and Airtable. We're looking at a player in the offensive cybersecurity space that could be interesting. We're looking at a player that releases an ODB2 application for consumers. It's an interesting business. We have one turnaround case that could be very interested in the prosumer music industry space. And each of these players are doing at least double-digit net revenues or 5-6 million in EBITDA. So these are all very interesting players for us that are just in our sweet spot. And not all of these deals are going to work out. So these are, 5 of the hottest deals that we're looking at. I think there are 2 more that I forgot to mention now, but we have a team of 6 investment professionals and we work in parallel on those deals, and it's a bit of competition internally who's going to push through their deal. But it's healthy competition.
What about your thoughts about having diversified portfolio, and how is your view about this?
I mean, I think diversification is the most important thing that you can have. And as we grow, we try to become more diversified. It's a bit of a trade-off because we obviously want to develop some expertise in certain industries in which we think about those industries as clusters. So for us, that would be online dating, it would be outdoor consumer apps, online classified business, and then we have a small B2B segment. But as we move forward, we're going to try to align the drive for expertise in one of these investment themes, and we're gonna move towards trying to diversify the revenue and profit streams across those segments, so that we're becoming more diversified. You never know what's going to happen sometime, in future down the line. I always use, there is a famous Austrian entrepreneur, his name is Dogodan, forgot his last name. So he was basically owning Do & Co. And Do & Co had 3 main businesses. They were doing airline catering. They had a restaurant business, including event catering. And then they owned the catering for the Formula One. He always thought he was perfectly diversified until COVID hit, and all 3 revenue streams got shut down overnight: airline business, event, Formula One, restaurant. And I think you have to be really careful. Our main risk is that the internet ceases to exist in the way it exists today, and that will be a big issue for us. But you never know. So we value diversification very highly.
What about some of the lessons and maybe challenges, especially in the early days when you had a smaller team? What were some of the mistakes you maybe made? First of all, maybe being too optimistic when it comes to making an investment or anything like this.
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake, I don't know if you call it a mistake, but it was a lack of experience. And then we made deals, or we were willing to do deals that we wouldn't do anymore today, because we did those deals because we didn't have enough optionality. I think our business is a numbers game. You need to create as much optionality as possible. You need to create as much deal flow as possible, because the more you throw in on top, the higher your threshold for good deals and the better the result. So we would not understand what was a truly great deal. And these deals come. And sometimes you're not going to do a deal So we did the last significant deal we did in October 2022, which was now is almost 2 years ago. Now we have a couple of deals. We're going to close 1 or 2 this year, but last year, and I think you asked me that question before in terms of deal flow, we were just in a situation where the price expectations of sellers were still very high and there was not a lot of movement on the market. And that's clearing up this year. Prices people are willing to pay are moving closer towards, or actually it's the prices sellers are willing to expect, they're moving towards the prices that buyers are willing to pay. But the biggest mistake is not creating too much option, not enough optionality, not having enough deal flow, and thereby not choosing the best deals.
You mentioned you wouldn't buy this or wouldn't invest in few businesses. The investments you made, you wouldn't do that today, knowing what you know today. But do you remember what was it like one acquisition that made all the difference when it comes to this, or was it something else? What I mean in here is maybe one of those companies you acquired was so good and it gave you a view about the future that, okay, this is it. This is what we need to do. This is what we need to focus on and forget everything else.
We have done several acquisitions where we've been able to generate IRRs above 40%, not 2, not 3, over 3 major acquisitions, and where we were able to generate significant distributions within the first 2 years, significant being above 60, 70%. So on average of all the money we have invested so far, we have been able to generate 60% of what we have invested, we've already distributed again and used for new investments. And so a lot of these early companies, they were decent. None of them were terrible, but they were investments that were rather average at 15, 20% IRR, low DPI, so low distributions, low cash back, and our bottleneck is capital. So we need capital to do new investments. We need distributions. If we cannot generate distributions from the deals that we do, we're going to have a growth issue going forward. And so when we look back, we did a couple of deals that were just too small to get bank financing, and we wouldn't do any more. Were no write-offs in those transactions, but it was. We also did a couple of VC deals that we wouldn't do anymore, that didn't give us a controlling stake. We did fund investments in the past, which really helped us to learn how the investment world worked. We wouldn't do that anymore. Today, 99% of our time, we're focusing on majority investments in very profitable niches. And that has worked for us well in the past. And it's in the past been about 70% of what we do. Since 3 years, it's everything we do. And we don't do VC, we don't do fund investments anymore, not even a single euro.
I'm sure there is a lot going on your portfolio, but how does your day-to-day look like?
Good question. So my main job as an investment manager, and that is actually my role, is to generate deal flow, to follow through on the most attractive deals and try to invest into those companies. So it's really having calls to generate new deal flow. It's on the hot deals, doing expert calls myself, understanding the industry, speaking with the management, doing workshops, doing demos of the product, looking at due diligences. I personally spend a lot of time around in incentives and the right incentive setting. That is something we actually think about a lot. How can we, because we're a small team, we're 10 people in the holding, and we have 500-600 people across all companies, all majority holdings, and we need to find a way of being able to act successfully in a very decentralized setting. And so that's where we put a lot of thinking into. So we don't want to grow the holding, but we'd rather have incentive mechanisms in place that allow us to work in a more decentralized manner.
Now, a few personal questions. How do you handle the pressure and responsibilities that comes with managing those investments, this portfolio, 600 people?
Yeah, I mean, it has grown a bit, or it's grown organically, right? So I used to run one of these companies myself, and then that gives you a very good operational understanding. And we've really built that. That's on one hand, and on the other hand, we've built a system that works very decentral. So it really doesn't depend on my person at all. We're a team of 6 investment professionals in the holding. We're 4 people in fund ops, and each of us has a very clear role and responsibility. And most of us have been working together since the beginning. Most of the people are around for at least 5-6 years, and it's a team, the 3 phases of forming, storming, performing, and we've been in the performing phase for a very long time. And so a lot of this stuff doesn't really lie with me. It is really distributed quite well across the team. And then the operational issues, they all lie with the individual partners, equity partners who run those companies. So they get a lot of freedom, but they also hold a lot of responsibility.
What motivates you today, and what do you want to accomplish next?
What I enjoy is that we have products that people really use. So if you if you talk about online dating at a dinner conversation, everyone becomes interested. And there are a lot of interesting facts and stats you can share. And so maybe one for this group, which I always find interesting, is that the more casual you go in dating, it's a very bad gender ratio, and I think very few people realize this. So portals. There was a great movie on Ashley Madison on Netflix, and I recommend people watch this. But they don't really address the main issue. And the main issue of Ashley Madison has been that they have run this site with fake profiles of men. And so you end up being, I don't know, there is one woman for every 9 men on the site. And that's also true for Tinder, where I think the ratio is maybe 70 or 80, 20. And so what excites me is really you have products that people really use. We have an outdoor hiking app with Backfix that's big, that I use on a weekly basis. And then again, we're operating in an industry that is quite free of processes and free of legacy. It's not a big corporate where you wear suits and you have to adhere to policies. So it's small companies and in small niches. You can enjoy financial freedom, but you can also enjoy a lot of personal freedom operating these companies.
How has entrepreneurship at building the Russ Media Equity Partners changed your life and changed your family life?
I mean, the most important thing is financial freedom, because these companies run very profitably, and we've been very lucky in the industry in that we operate. In a growing industry, it's not always been easy. In some of these industries, it's getting more difficult because it's getting more regulated. But overall, I think the most important difference is the financial freedom that building these companies has allowed our family to have.
Let's wrap up with a famous 5. How old are you?
38, I was near think.
Favorite book?
Tough one. The book that helped me most is Getting Things Done. I highly recommend that. GTD.
Married, single, kids?
2 kids, 1 and 3 married.
What car do you drive?
A Kia.
What's the best investment advice you've ever got?
I think that was Ray Dalio. Also great book, by the way, Principles of Ray Dalio. But what he has said is never bet the bank. So make calculated bets, but only to an amount which you're willing to lose. Up to an amount you're willing to lose. And I think that makes a lot of sense. You need to be able to recover from what you lose.
Last one. Where can people find you?
I think LinkedIn is probably the easiest way. And if you message me, please include a short message why. I'm usually very responsive there.
Okay.
And look forward to anyone reaching out.
Okay. Thanks a lot for this conversation. It took us a month to do that. I'm very happy.
Thank you. Thanks for taking the time, huh?